Hello, my name is Jeff Modrzewski. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I work as the engagement manager for the Diversity Center of Northeast Ohio. I'd like to thank you for viewing this video today on exploring identity. I hope in the course of this short video that you'll gain a better understanding of identity and how individual identities affect your day-to-day life and the day-to-day lives of those around you. Let's start off by talking very quickly about the history of the Diversity Center of Northeast Ohio. We were formed in 1927 as the National Conference for Christians and Jews. We're now a member of the National Federation of Just Communities, which has chapters all across the United States. Organizationally, our mission is to eliminate bias, bigotry, and racism, and we're committed to creating communities where everybody is connected, respected, and valued. Now, I quickly want to talk about the concepts of diversity and inclusion before we move into this activity on identity. What we like to say is that diversity happens, but inclusion is a conscious choice. And I think it's helpful to define these terms really quickly. With diversity, what we mean is just showing a great deal of variety or difference in a group of things. Diversity always happens in a group. You can't have diversity in one individual. It's difference among a variety of things. Think about a box of crayons. All of those different colors show diversity in that box of crayons. Now, diversity and inclusion are often considered very similar concepts, but there is some pretty key differences. Diversity is something that's always going to happen because it's just about having difference among a group. Inclusion is the intentional and ongoing engagement with diversity. So inclusion means engaging in that difference, understanding and working within that difference. One analogy that I like to say is that diversity is being invited to the party, whereas inclusion means being asked to dance. Diversity just means being in the room. Inclusion means being included in the decision making, in the ongoing work within the diversity that happens in a group. So when we talk about diversity and moving into this concept of identity, we often start with this diversity wheel. And this shows a variety of different identities that individuals can have or individuals can feel a part of. You'll see there's a whole lot of different levels of this. In the inner circle, we have what are often considered the major identity markers: age, gender, race, sexual orientation, religion, spirituality, or non-religion, ability, nationality, socioeconomic status, and ethnicity. When people think about identity or think about diversity, they often think about these concepts first and where they fall in these different categories. Obviously, for many people, many of these categories are very important in their day-to-day life and how they identify. At the Diversity Center, we take a very broad definition of diversity. What we mean by that is that we don't just look at those inner ring concepts. We're also looking at that middle ring, things like diversity in thought, geographic location, emotional intelligence, military experience or veteran status, family structure or parental status. All of these things can be very influential on how a person identifies, and they can really impact our day-to-day lives, sometimes more so than some of those inner ring identities. So I like to show that there's a lot of different pieces to identity beyond those inner ring identities that we have. In that outer ring, we have workplace identities. Obviously, for many people, their workplace is critical in how they live their life. And these different identities on the outside can really have an impact on how they work in their day-to-day life. So things like what your job title is, your seniority at an organization, what location you're at. For large workplaces, we know that different locations often have different personalities or get different amounts of or different types of respect or different resources. So your workplace location can be very important. Are you a member of a union or not a member of a union? For some workplaces, obviously, that's very important as well. Are you as part of management or not part of management? So all of this just shows the broad range of different identities that fall under this concept of diversity and different ways that we as individuals can identify. Now we use this concept to create individual diversity wheels. I'm going to show you my individual diversity wheel, which is going to show some ways, some of the key identities that I hold. So when we're talking about identity, we're talking about an individual's affiliation or identification with a particular group. And this identity wheel shows some of my key identities and the groups that I identify with that affect me on a day-to-day basis. Now you'll notice that many of these slices are vary in size. The larger ones are the ones that I think about more often, are the ones that have the greater impact on my day-to-day life. So some of my larger slices are the fact that I'm a parent. I consider my family, my children, when almost every decision I make, and it's something that impacts me every single day on an ongoing, regular basis. My second biggest slice is the fact that I'm a man. And there's a couple of reasons that I consider that such a large slice. The first being is the group that I work with, the team that I work with, is up until recently was made up of all women other than myself. So it's something that I have to consider when working with women, that I'm not in the majority in terms of gender. And that's something that I have to be aware of on a regular basis. Also, I work talking about diversity and inclusion. So I know that when I walk into a room, the fact that I'm a man, and you'll also see in there that I'm, a smaller slice of my pie is that I'm white. The fact that I'm a white man has an impact in how I walk into a room and how people view me, particularly when I'm going to talk about concepts like gender or race or sexual orientation or these different identities. Another slice of my pie that's a little bit larger is the fact that I'm on the Generation X millennial cusp. I was born in 1979. I just turned 40. So the fact that I don't quite fit into the Gen X and I don't quite fit into the millennial generation is something that does have an impact on me on a regular basis, and it is something that I think about. I'm going to take a couple moments here and let some of my colleagues talk about their identity wheels and a couple of things that impact them on a regular basis.
Hi, my name is Caitlin, and I want to share my identity wheel with you today. So the two largest slices on my pie, as you can see, are being young, being a millennial, and being a woman. And these are two pretty large slices of my pie, and I know that because when I go and stand in front of audiences and talk about diversity and equity and inclusion, I recognize that a lot of times the first things that people notice about me are the fact that I'm young and that I'm a woman. It's the first thing they see. And that can sometimes lead to stereotypes or people just kind of automatically assuming what my intelligence or experience or research ability is. And so that's one way in which these two identities are pretty large and pretty important for me, especially in the work that I do. So one example that I have of one time when these became very apparent to me was when I was with my colleague Jeff, who you can't see from the video, but he's about 6'4", white man, and we were going to a client's office to do a workshop together. And so we were walking to this office, and I had met this client before and spoken to them before over the phone, and Jeff had never met them before. And so we were walking into the office, and I was walking in first. And I had my roller bag with me, and Jeff was walking in behind me. And the CEO president came to meet us at the front door. And I remember very distinctly the CEO president reaching his hand across my face in front of my head to reach Jeff's hand to shake first instead of mine. He must have assumed that Jeff was there to lead the meeting or that he was the senior person, when in fact I was there to lead the workshop and I was a senior person. And so that is one way that these two identities definitely play a role in my experiences in day-to-day life.
Hello, My name is KJ, and at the Diversity Center, I am a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant for higher education and young adults. I would like to share with you the way that my identities have impacted my life, both personally and professionally. I completed this activity for the first time about 5 years ago, and it had changed over the years. What I love most about this activity is that it allows for reflection on the way that identities can hold different meanings for different people, and that this can change over time. The educator portion is a fairly recent addition to my identity wheel, as I have grown in my commitment to sharing and receiving knowledge. I hold this commitment in my personal life and education, and also in my professional life as a consultant. English is the only language that I speak as of right now. I am learning American Sign Language, and one day I'll be able to add that to my fluencies. So identity can change and adapt over time depending on new experiences or changes that may take place in your life. I have been hard of hearing from birth. At the age of 4, I was fitted for my first pair of hearing aids. And then I went on to attend speech therapy for over 9 years. And today I read lips for the majority of my communication. So in my personal life, this has really fostered my love and preference for reading. I use closed captions and subtitles, and I prefer to read the transcript rather than listen to an audio recording. So all of these things impact my professional life and the choices that I make for audience engagement when facilitating workshops. Being hard of hearing and being a Black person are two pieces of my identity that impact me the most, personally and professionally. They both have influence on the decisions that I make, the way that people perceive me, and the way that I perceive the world. So, over many years of delivering programs and workshops to a variety of higher industry professionals, I have consistently noticed that I'm often one of very few Black people in the room. So, my understanding of my family's history and the history of the United States is really shaped through what I have learned in my experiences and in my education. So there are some parts of my identity that you wouldn't be able to tell just by looking at me, or even just by having a short conversation with me. Other parts of my identity you might be able to identify more easily. But this still may not give you the entire story of how I understand or present myself. So I encourage you to really keep that in mind as you reflect on and complete your own identity wheel. Thank you.
So I hope you found that interesting hearing from some of my colleagues that have different identities about their own identities and how their identities impact them. What I'm going to ask you to do now is to take a few minutes and create your own identity wheel. It's very simple. You draw a circle and make yourself a little pie chart with including the identities that you feel most impact you on a day-to-day basis, making the ones that have the biggest impact on you larger, the ones that maybe don't have quite as much of an impact on your day-to-day life smaller. You can use any of these identities that are included here. You can also use other identities if there's certain ways that you identify or certain things that you hold closely that you want to include on your identity wheel. While you're getting started, I do want to share a little bit about my experience in creating this. When I first did my identity wheel, I struggled putting it together. I realized that I didn't think about my identities very often. As you see again on my identity wheel, I am a white, heterosexual, able bodied male. Um, A lot of the identities that I hold are what would be considered privileged identities. They're not identities that are going to negatively impact me on a day-to-day basis or make my life more difficult on a regular basis. Because of that, I hadn't done much thought about my own identities. When it came time for me to make this wheel, I realized that it was just something I didn't think about very often. And it's something that I'm privileged that I don't have to think about very often because of the identities I hold. I'm saying that because if you're struggling with this activity, with this idea of making your own identity wheel, I want to let you know that's very natural and very understandable. I'd still like you to take a couple of minutes and create your own identity wheel based on the identities that you hold. Again, you can pause the video if you'd like and take a couple of minutes to do that. So I hope you found that activity worthwhile and that you learned a little bit about yourself and thinking about your own individual identities and thinking about which identities impact you the most on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to go through a couple reflection questions. Now, if you're doing this as a part of a group, I'd encourage you to have a discussion around some of these questions. If you're doing this by yourself, I'd like you to think about and answer these questions to yourself as you think about your own identity wheel. Think about first, what identities do you think about the most and the least, and why is that? Your larger slices, why do you think about those the most? Your smaller slices, why don't you have to think about those very often? Think about why it is that these slices are bigger or smaller in your mind. The next question is, how does your identity impact your personal and your professional experiences? How has the identities that you hold impacted your daily life in a personal way, but also your professional life? Where has that shown up in your life? The third question to think about or discuss is, how does understanding your own social identities impact your interactions? How does understanding your own identities and even the identities of others help you in your interactions in your day-to-day life? And then finally, how can you take this exercise and this concept of identity and apply it to the context of your work? Where does understanding identity fit into your work? What are some ways that you can use this activity uh, to improve your relationships with your coworkers, with your clients, with people you see on a regular basis, or people you see in your workplace? So I hope that these reflection questions can give you a little bit of more of an insight on your identity wheel and the identity wheel of others. Some other reflections I'd like you to think about. I want you to remember that everyone has social identities, often identities that are different than what you might expect. Our identities don't always match up with the identities of others. And we all have, again, we all have these social identities. We're going to think about some of these identities more than others. Some of them are going to have more of an impact on us. And the identities that are more likely to negatively impact us are the ones that we are going to think about the most often, most likely. We have to remember, we might not know what somebody's big slices and small slices are. We don't know what the big slices and small slices of somebody else's identity wheel might be. And then we all have experiences, different experiences based on our identities. Our identities act as a lens through which we see the world, and it also impacts how the world sees us. We walk through the world differently because of these different identities that we hold. Our identities, this is important because our identities and experience, they can influence our perceptions of others, and that is the start of leading into biases. We're not going to have a conversation on bias today. That is obviously something that we can do other work on, but this is a key concept when you're going to move into understanding what bias is and how it impacts our day-to-day life. So I hope you found this interesting and informative. I hope you learned something about yourself and this concept of identity. If you'd like to learn more about the work that we do at the Diversity Center, please feel free to reach out. We have my contact information up there, my email address, and our phone number for the Diversity Center, as well as our website. We have programs such as unconscious bias and micro messages, this identity piece is a small part of that understanding unconscious bias and micromessages program. We also have programs on creating inclusive work teams, privilege and systemic inequities. We have programs on a variety of different identities like our sexuality and gender acceptance programs, as well as our racial justice series. And we also do customized consulting around diversity and inclusion. So if your organization is interested in learning more about diversity and inclusion or looking for ways to create a more inclusive environment, we would love to be a part of that. Thank you very much. Again, I hope you found this interesting, and I would hope to work with you soon. Have a great day.